Hey everyone, thanks for joining me on today's episode of 20 Somethings. I'm Tico, and I'm just a 20 something with a lot of baggage, and I ain't talking Birkins, baby. Today's episode is deeply personal and kinda heavy, not gonna lie. Today, I want to talk about a very precious family heirloom that was passed down to me through generation after generation. It was my birthright, my inheritance, something that I hold near and dear to my heart and carry with me everywhere I go. Today, I'll be talking about trauma. I'll be sharing my experiences and reflecting on how it shaped me, how it's affected me, how it's made me a better person, and how it's made me a burden to society. I'll be unpacking it all. Before we begin, though, I'd like to make a disclaimer. I'm not a psychologist, I'm not a licensed therapist either, and I have no business giving mental health advice. But I do have charisma, uniqueness, nerve, and talent, and a microphone. So here we are. This episode is not a substitute for therapy. Please seek actual help if you need it. I can only offer thoughts and prayers and good intentions. I'd also like to give a trigger warning since I'll be discussing extremely sexy topics like abuse and neglect and other sensitive experiences. If at any point it feels like too much, please take care of yourself and step away if needed. With that said, let's get into it. Alright, let's break this down. So, trauma doesn't occur within a vacuum. Traumatic experiences are not isolated events. Trauma happens within a complex web of factors, so it's important to not take things out of context. So, how someone experiences a traumatic event is significantly affected by their personal relationships, their community dynamics, and various societal structures. So, factors like race, gender, socioeconomic status, and sexual orientation can all play a role in how trauma is experienced and processed. So, for example, a person experiencing homophobia might be more severely impacted by their trauma if they also face discrimination based on how dark their skin is or how they express their gender identity and not just who they're sexually attracted to. So it's all intersectional. Trauma can also be compounded. It can be a series of events that happens to a person all at once or over a period of time, and the way your brain wires or rewires itself for survival, even when the danger is gone. So, trauma isn't just a thing that happened, it's the way your brain and body reacts to that thing, or those things. So, you might get physical symptoms like headaches, tension, or emotional symptoms like anxiety, numbness, or randomly crying in the cereal aisle while shopping for groceries or something. And then there's the behavioral side. So, have you ever self sabotaged a good thing for no reason? Or felt the sudden urge to disappear when life gets overwhelming? If you're like me, you've probably done that a million times. And if you've done that a million times, surprise, surprise, just like me, you're a severely traumatized individual. Trauma also affects your memory, which is interesting because your brain will literally block out memories that were far too painful to ever remember again, all in the name of self preservation. I also learned recently that the brain blocks out trauma until you have the resources to be able to process it. Isn't that cool? It's why you'll have random flashbacks just pop in your head when you're doing your gay little tasks, or how you're able to unlock certain memories when you take certain psychedelics. But I, for one, definitely have short term memory issues. I barely remember what I had for breakfast yesterday, let alone something that happened 4 or 5 years ago. And I think it's fucked up how people don't take trauma as seriously as they should. Trauma literally messes with the parts of your brain responsible for memory, judgment, and decision making. So, the part of your brain that helps process and stores memories can actually shrink under prolonged stress, which makes it harder to distinguish between past and present danger. Which is probably why my fight or flight is always flight. That's why I'm always running from shit. And that part of your brain that's it's, I don't know, your brain's natural alarm system, like when it senses threats, it will go into overdrive. So it makes you like hyper aware and easily triggered. And the part that's responsible for rational thinking and impulse control, guess what? Trauma can weaken that too. And its ability to regulate emotions. Your brain, it becomes a game of fight or flight or freeze or self sabotage. So I don't know, like expecting a traumatized brain to function like a non traumatized brain is like trying to run a marathon on a broken leg. Of course, you can like try, but every step is gonna hurt like hell, and your balance will be like thrown off, and eventually you're gonna like collapse. So, just like how you wouldn't tell someone with a broken bone to just walk it off, you can't tell someone with trauma to just think their way out of it. Healing takes time, patience, and the right kind of support because nobody runs a marathon without some rehab first. Unfortunately, though, the society we live in barely acknowledges this. The bills that need to be paid, the songs that need to be written, the assignments that need to be submitted, and the capitalist society we live in don't give a fuck about our trauma. We could be fighting for our lives on the living room floor, crying our eyes out, and they couldn't give a damn. Get your fucking ass up and work, bitch. And the gag is, like, so many of us are showing up to work unhealed, never having taken the time out to process everything that happened to us over the years. Because honestly, the more I reflect on myself and the life I've lived, it's like, bitch, you've been through it. Like, really been through it. I'm traumatized, girl. Traumatized! And I know I'm traumatized because so many of the struggles I deal with daily line up with symptoms of CPTSD, which is complex post traumatic stress disorder. And it's not like me just having a hard day or being sensitive or over dramatic as usual. It's like a whole lot of things that I feel have taken root in my mind and body. So, for example, there's like an inability to concentrate. Like, my mind feels like it's constantly in overdrive or worse, blank when I need it most. You know what I mean? Like, my brain's either running a marathon or taking a nap. There's literally no in between. I also have an inability to commit to things. Like, even when I want to commit, something in me like pulls me back. Like maybe it's me being terrified of failure. Maybe it's like me being afraid of rejection. Who knows? It's me panicking when I think I'm in trouble or when I feel like I'm trapped. Like whether it's a bad situation or just like a meeting that's too long, my brain is already looking for an emergency exit. Like the smallest hint of danger, real or imagined, feels like, I don't know, like the world is closing in on me. I also panic when I think someone's like mad at me. And like, let's be real, I think someone's mad at me like all the time. I can barely function when I feel like I've upset someone, not gonna lie. Also, there's like constant guilt. I carry guilt like a backpack filled with bricks. And I can't seem to put it down. Like, guilt is my love language. Like, if guilt were a sport, I'd have a gold medal and 3 endorsement deals by now. Like, I feel guilty all the time. Not to mention, like, a really harsh inner critic. That voice in my head that's always telling me I'm not good enough, that I should have done more, that I should have been better. She's a bitch. She's a mean girl. I hate her so much. Relationship issues. That's something I also struggle with. Like, I want love. I crave love. But also, please don't get too close or I'll, like, spontaneously combust. It's ironic. Like, I want connection, but I'm terrified of it at the same time. Like, literally. What's that about? Disassociating. Like, feeling disconnected from reality, where days kind of blur together and time feels not real. Time feels like a construct, to be honest. Like, there's also like poor impulse control. Like, impulse control, never heard of her. Whether it's like overspending or doom scrolling or emotional outbursts, I'm the queen of why did I do that? I also often act before I think. My feelings will like outweigh logic 99.9% of the time. And like I also like procrastinate. Like, I'll fight a bear before I start something I'm supposed to be doing. Actually, I'd fuck a bear. But not like a bear. But like a big hairy man with a dad bod. You know what I mean? I also like punish myself a lot. Like, whether it's through like disordered eating or drinking too much when I feel overwhelmed or just like mentally berating myself. I can't let I can't seem to let myself off the hook for like existing. And like that's just like a brief sample of the shit I deal with constantly. And these things don't just go away when someone tells me to like relax or to like stop overthinking. Like, what the fuck? It's, I don't know, it's kind of like my brain looked up my life and was like, hey, bestie, let's make things harder than they need to be. And honestly, sometimes I just have to laugh at the absurdity of it all. Like, sure, life handed me lemons, but instead of lemons, I accidentally made a Molotov cocktail or something. But it's whatever. Here I am, still standing. A little bruised, a little broken, but still here. Let's be real. If I can survive half the shit I've been through and half the shit I put myself through, I can survive anything. Trust. But don't worry. Once I overcome my negative self talk through dialectic behavioral therapy and implement healthier coping mechanisms to deal with my trauma, it's gonna be over for you bitches. Trust. Now let's break some myths down real quick. So, myth number one, trauma only comes from big, catastrophic events. Nope. Trauma isn't just reserved for war veterans or disaster survivors or people with tragic backstories. Sure, those are extreme cases, but trauma is deeply personal. It's not about how bad an event was, but how your brain and body responds to it. So, for some, trauma comes from a single shocking event, like a car accident, or a natural disaster, or a death. But for many others, it's the smaller, ongoing experiences that leave the deepest scars. Things like emotional neglect, toxic relationships, or constantly feeling unsafe in your own home. So you don't have to have like one big defining trauma for your brain to decide, hey, let's never feel safe again. Sometimes it's the slow drip of stress and fear over time that does this damage. Myth number two, time heals all wounds. Cute saying, but also a lie. If time alone healed wounds, we wouldn't have entire generations like mine passing down unprocessed trauma like a family heirloom. Like, time can create distance from the event, sure. It can dull the sharp edges of a painful memory, but real healing takes effort. Like, whether that means therapy, self reflection, breaking harmful patterns, or learning new coping mechanisms. Like, time without action is just waiting, to be honest. And I've learned the hard way that unhealed trauma doesn't just sit quietly in the past, it finds sneaky little ways to show up in your present, influencing your relationships, your self worth, and your ability to trust others and yourself. So, no, time alone doesn't fix it. But doing the work, whatever that means, that's where the real magic happens. So, now that we've established that trauma is messyboots.com.org.co.uk, what do we do about it besides making dark jokes? Obviously. First up, therapy. If you can access it, that is. Like, I highly recommend letting a professional help you sort through your emotional attic. Like, it's important. I need a therapist, like, yesterday. Then there's mindfulness. I know that meditation sounds like something only people who own at least three crystals do, and I have a lot of crystals. I'm very much one of those girls. But hear me out. Taking even 5 minutes to breathe, journal, or just be still can help rewire your brain, trust me. Speaking of journaling, putting your mess on paper sometimes make it feels a little bit less messy. Trust me, I've been there and something I do constantly. Also, community is also huge. Like, The last episode, we actually spoke with Imani, and they were mentioning how important it is to have a community and a support system that you can rely on. And it's not to say that you have to trauma dump on the first unsuspecting friend you see, but finding people who get it and who understand where you're coming from, that's actually very helpful and it's healing in a way. And if your current circle, for whatever reason, is more toxic group chat than support system, it might be time to hit unsubscribe on some people, to be honest. And of course, the thing that nobody tells anybody is that avoiding trauma doesn't make it disappear. Ignoring it is like leaving a messy room untouched for years. Eventually, you're gonna trip over something, or worse, something's gonna crawl out from under the bed. And trust me, I know. I have so many monsters under my bed, child. Most of which stem from childhood. And like most people, my childhood trauma shaped the way I see myself, other people, and the world around me. So let's get into it. Like, I don't know. Growing up, my family dynamic was complicated to say the least. For starters, my parents' relationship was rocky from the beginning, dysfunctional, if you will. So, I was born into a household already fractured by my father's numerous infidelities. Like, not to spill anybody's tea, but that's what it was. And even though my mom chose to say she never really truly forgave him, and that tension never really left, you know? So, just for context between them, my parents had like three kids. My eldest brother, who was born early in the relationship, followed by my second oldest brother, and then me. But it wasn't as simple as that. So, after my eldest brother was born, my father cheated on my mom and had a son with another woman. Then, after my second brother was born, my father cheated again with the same woman and had a daughter. And even after I came along, he stepped out once more, this time with a different woman, and had another son. So in total, I have like two full brothers between my parents that I grew up with, and three half siblings that I didn't grow up with. So it's like this patchwork family shaped by betrayal and hurt. And that constant tension between my parents fueled by my dad's infidelities and my mom's unresolved pain created an extremely unstable foundation for our home life. Like, even as a child, I could sense that undercurrent of conflict and broken trust that hung over everything. Every day was an argument. Every day was a fight. My house was loud as shit. And it's why, even to this day, loud noises are so triggering for me. Like, if you raise your voice or yell at me for whatever reason, I'm going to emotionally shut down. I also have this like tendency to tense up automatically and remain on edge even if you leave the room. Like once you're loud, like that's it. That's it. I can't deal with aggressive people, sorry. And that's why I was honestly afraid of my mom for years growing up. Like she was more aggressive compared to my dad. And so whenever she left the house and would call to check up on us, meaning my brothers and I would run and hide in the bathroom until she hung up. And I guess the reason I was frightened is because she'd go off for the simplest things and, criticize everything I did. And I don't know if it's emasculating, like, I don't know if that's fair to say, but it did make me, like, hyper aware. And it put my body on high alert when she was around. Like, I'd walk on eggshells so as to not, like, upset the balance. Always holding my breath, even without realizing it. Which I still do to this day, not gonna lie. But, you know, in all that chaos, my dad was like the one person I felt safe around, honestly. I don't know what I would have done if he wasn't in the picture because my mom and brothers were brutal AF. My dad, though, he was like so encouraging as a parent. He'd buy me Barbie dolls when I went to the toy store and I would pick them up and like ask him to get it. Like he'd do that, like he'd get it for me. Even though he knew I'd probably make my mom and brothers upset. And, he actively supported my love for Lady Gaga, bringing home newspapers whenever he saw her name or getting me magazines with her on the cover. He made me feel seen in a way that nobody else did growing up. And I don't know, something I feel like not many people understand is that when we experience childhood trauma, our internal threat system is in overdrive. We don't feel at ease in situations that are outside our comfort zone. And honestly, I really felt comfortable in my house. Like, my dad was a one exception though, and for that I'll always be grateful. But there was this dynamic shift when my mom adopted my sister and brought her into the family when I was around 6. Suddenly, I went from feeling like I was special to feeling invisible. The attention shifted entirely to her, and it was like my light dimmed in everyone's eyes. And that's when the belief started to take root. I'm not good enough. And once it was there, it stuck with me for years, shaping how I saw myself and my place in the world. I did feel abandoned, and I felt like the ugly duckling, the black sheep. Like, no matter what I did, I would never measure up. She was always getting the special treatment, always getting babied while I had to like fend for myself. If she wanted something, she got it, served to her on a silver platter. Me, I had to work for everything. Nothing ever felt easy or handed to me. Didn't matter that I was compliant and polite and studious and always did what I was told and always got good grades and never got in trouble. It didn't matter because she didn't have to do all of that. She could just exist. And of course, I was envious. Who wouldn't be? Imagine watching someone coast through life while you're over here breaking your back just trying to be noticed. It's not that I hated her or wanted her to suffer. It's not nothing like that. It's just I wanted to feel like I mattered too. Like I was worth celebrating, worth caring about, you know? But instead it was always her. Her needs, her feelings, her happiness, blah 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 blah. Meanwhile, I was left sitting on the sidelines wondering if there was something wrong with me. Why didn't I deserve the same kind of love? Like the same softness, the same sense of security. And I mentioned, that envy is something I deal with constantly, but it's not a pretty feeling. It eats at you, makes you doubt yourself in ways you can't even articulate. But it was there, gnawing at me, making me question if I would ever be enough for the people who were supposed to love me unconditionally. Home was supposed to feel like a safe haven, but it wasn't. And then the bullying started around that time too. My two older brothers would mock me for being sensitive or for crying easily. Like I cried all the time. Like I cried all the time, all the time. I was such a softie. I'd be teased for being girly. Um, and like living in a society that discouraged vulnerability in boys, it's rough. It's rough. And so I kind of learned to like suppress my emotions because like showing them made me a target. You know what I mean? And I learned to retreat into myself. I learned to shrink, and I learned to not take up space. Especially after like my love for performing and being extra was constantly discouraged. Like I remember dropping out of a Christmas show back in like basic school because of like anxiety. It was one of the first times I felt my fear of failure outweigh my passion. Like I had the opportunity to be the lead in like a school play or something, and I was really excited about it. But at the very last minute, I decided not to show up, and I felt so guilty the next day when my teacher showed how disappointed she was that I couldn't make it. That was a pattern I carried for years, letting fear stop me from doing the things I loved. And I know I'm not the only one who's felt this way. If you've ever been bullied or discouraged, you know how those words and experiences stick with you. It's like carrying an invisible weight everywhere you go. And it's funny because I was never bullied at school. Like, I was always a great student, but when you're praised at school and then you come home and get constantly berated, it does something to you. So it's why whenever people would say great things about me, even now, like I don't really believe them because in my head, my family was around me more often, so they knew me more, and my teachers and my peers would compliment me like they were only around me for a couple hours a day. So I was more inclined to believe my family since I was around them more. You know what I mean? And they knew me for a longer period of time. So when my family would tell me how worthless and stupid and good for nothing I was, then everyone else who thought I was smart and funny and kind, it's like, you don't know me. I can't believe you. So, I don't know. I guess it's why I have such a fragmented sense of self and also why I have trust issues. Like, I don't believe anything anyone ever says, especially about me. Like, of course, I appreciate when people say nice things, but I've learned to take everything people say about me with a grain of salt. And I try not to lose myself in praise and condemnation. Like, I try not to, you know? But it did make me depressed, not gonna lie. It made me, like, you know, anxious. And I don't know, I kind of felt like I was constantly fighting for survival, like, all the time. You know what I mean? And so that's when I started to turn to escapism, like books and movies and music, to disassociate from the reality I didn't want to face. And I don't know. I don't know. Like, I've been through some shit. You know what I mean? Like, especially as far as like my family is concerned. Like, I remember this one time, like, speaking of like when your survival instincts like kick in and you just have to move. Like, I remember one night my mom and I had like an argument, like over money. This was around the time I started like working for the first time. Like, it escalated like really quickly, and before I knew it, she was like yelling and screaming and telling me to shut the fuck up before she came to where I was and stabbed me with a knife. And my brother was like standing there actually, and he chimed in like it was nothing, saying he'd help her bury the body. And me being me, I took the threat seriously. Like, I, hello, you're not gonna like threaten my life and I'm just gonna shrug it off, the fuck. So that night, like, my heart was pounding, and like I searched for the cheapest plane ticket I could find to Florida. Like, it wasn't even a choice, it was just somewhere else I needed to go, it didn't matter where. And like, I quit my job the next day, packed my things, and by the day after that I was on a flight to Fort Lauderdale. And like, I literally had nowhere to go. Like, I met someone on Craigslist who had agreed to let me stay with him. I don't know, it sounds like crazy in hindsight, but desperation will make you do crazy things, like trusting strangers you meet online. Um, so yeah, when I landed, like, he picked me up from the airport, drove me to a Dunkin' Donuts, and sat me down. And that's when he told me he couldn't let me stay with him, but he had made arrangements for me at a halfway house, so I shouldn't worry. But of course, I was gonna worry. What? I didn't know what to say, what to feel. Everything was just like moving so fast for me to process. So after that, I reluctantly agreed. I was like, sure. And then he's like, meet me in the bathroom, let's make out. I was like, oh, okay, cool. So we did that. Then he drove me to a place called Covenant House. It was in Fort Lauderdale. And one of the staff members like brought me to my room, which was shared. I had to share it with other boys at the time. And when they showed me the room, I felt like I was suffocating. So I asked if I could like go for a walk. And once I stepped outside, I just kept walking. I didn't know where I was going, but I couldn't stop. I walked until I wore myself out, until my legs were literally aching me. And I found a random Starbucks, and I sat down at the chair just to like be still for a minute. And in that moment, a small voice in my head just said, go back. So I did. I went back. And I spent 3 weeks in that halfway house, homeless shelter basically is what it was, through Christmas and New Year's Eve. And eventually my family found out where I was and booked me a Greyhound bus ticket to New York to stay with my cousins. And you know what? I actually had a wonderful time in Fort Lauderdale, not gonna lie. Like, 3 square meals a day, a bed to sleep in, and some of the most interesting people I'd ever met. Like, what more could a guy ask for? And these people survived things far worse than I did. So it really helped me to put things into perspective. You know what I mean? Like, they had experienced trauma. And all I did was like run away from home because my life was being threatened. But whatever. Anyway, for almost a month I was like technically homeless. But in some ways I felt safer there than I ever did at home. So yeah. The reason I say that is because outside of the violence I witnessed growing up between my parents, There were some inappropriate sexual experiences in my early years as well. I won't go into detail, partly because it's nobody's business but mine and my therapist, but mostly because the details are actually kind of blurry. It's interesting to think that our memories are just remembering the last time we recalled a memory and not the actual memory itself, you know? Anyway, as I recall this memory, I like to preface that I have a hard time thinking of it as like molestation because I don't like to think of myself as a victim. Also, I was always a precocious child who generally preferred the company of adults, so I'm sure part of me liked the attention, even if I didn't have the vocabulary or understanding to process everything that happened. Anyway, to make a long story short, one day my cousin, who would have been around like 16 at the time, stopped by the house. And I was around 6, and this was before my sister came into the picture, so it was just me alone. My parents would often leave me at home alone by myself, and he wanted to come in, and I wasn't sure if I should have let him in, so I hesitated, debated. But eventually I did let him in, and he came to where I was, around the back, which was my parents' room, where I was watching TV, and he was snooping around underneath the TV stand, and he saw like a porn magazine that my dad had, discreetly hidden at the back. And he flipped through it and he asked me if I'd ever seen a penis before. And I said no. Then he asked me if I wanted to see one. And I don't even remember if I said yes or what. I don't remember much after that except him asking me to undress. Like, specifically remember getting naked because not too long after that, my next door neighbor was at the front door checking up on me. And I remember rushing to get dressed so I could go answer the door. And of course, my cousin left immediately. Um, Interestingly enough, though, he did visit another time to play Scrabble with me and my older brother and my brother's friend. And I remember us being on the bed, and my brother and his friend were on the floor. And while the two of us were on the bed, I was like discreetly feeling up my cousin's penis. All the two of us like laid on our stomach, and I don't know if I was being like too obvious about it, but he got up after a while and went to use the bathroom. And me being me, I got up to follow him, and I was like, "Can I come?" And he's like, "No, you can't come," and that can never happen again, and it never did. All I know is I became kind of like hypersexual after that. Like my next door neighbor, for example, had this biology book, and I remember there was like a page on human anatomy, and then I remember like my curiosity got the better of me, and I literally like licked the penis off that male diagram until it completely disappeared. Throat goat. And it's like I don't even know how I knew about blowjobs, but maybe I did give my cousin head when I was little because later on when I did give up BJ for the first time when I was 16 to another male relative that was around the same age, the sensation did feel familiar. So I don't know. Anyway, I didn't actually have full on sex till I was 18, so none of those borderline incestuous experiences count. Okay, thanks. Bye. I will say though that being exposed to porn at such an early age did warp my understanding of intimacy. It taught me that physical closeness was a substitute for emotional connection, a lesson that took me years to unlearn. And to be honest, I'm still in the process of unlearning. But as someone exploring their sexuality growing up, like, I faced stigma both within my family and society. Like, I was terrified of being rejected or disowned or kicked out of the house. So it took me until like 21 to come out, which I think I mentioned in a previous episode where I took like ecstasy and almost overdosed. And like, I didn't want to die without them knowing my truth. So I called my parents and I was like, "Hi guys, I think I'm gonna overdose. I took this drug. By the way, I'm gay." I think I mentioned that. If I didn't, that's what happened. Anyway, being queer in a society that doesn't fully accept you is a trauma in itself, to be honest. Like, I spent years hiding who I was, terrified of being rejected. But looking back, it's like, girl, be so for real. Like, nothing about you gave straight, but whatever. I'll never forget this one time when I was around 14, and I was on the family computer, like scrolling through Tumblr, completely minding my business, as one does. when something popped up on my dashboard that I knew my mom wouldn't approve of. It was gay porn, of course. And I panicked because she was right behind me at the time. And the more I scrolled, the worse it seemed to get. I was trying so hard to close the tab or get away from the screen, but it was too late. She had already seen it off. Like, I'm scrolling, freaking the fuck out. And it's like, the most hardcore gay porn you could imagine. Oh my god. Petrified, petrified. Anyway, she yelled at me, and no matter how much I tried to explain that it wasn't me, I was opposed to them. She was having it. She was having it. She wouldn't even listen. So she had my brother block Tumblr from the computer. She had him delete all the Lady Gaga pictures I'd saved on the computer. A devastating loss, honestly. And she banned me from the computer for a while. But she didn't stop there. No, she went and told one of our neighbors, who's this sweet old lady who's basically my godmother's mom, what happened. And she twisted it in a way that made me look terrible. I was mortified. Like, she told her that I was like watching gay porn. I was mortified. I wanted to vanish into thin air, not gonna lie. But that was the first time I told my mom I hated her. Like, I was so angry and humiliated. I couldn't hold it in. She cried, of course, and I ended up apologizing because I felt bad. But I always have to apologize somehow, somewhere in my house. Like, even when I have nothing to be sorry for, that was the rule somehow. Like, they can say and do whatever they wanted to me, but I wasn't allowed to defend myself or stand up for what I felt was unfair, or, it's always a problem. Like, I'm being rude or disrespectful, and it's just like, no, I'm defending myself. I'm standing up for myself. What? Anyway, looking back, like, that was just another moment that reminded me how powerless I felt growing up in my own home. There was another instance a few years later when my mom invaded my privacy. Like, I had like a photo album that I put in a suitcase under my bed, but she went out of her way to look into it, and she found nude pics of me and my ex-boyfriend at the time, and of course she destroyed them. And I felt exposed because, like, I came home one day and I saw my things were messed with, and I didn't see the picture. Like, my first instinct was to look in the suitcase to find the album because I knew that's where I put it, hidden. And of course, the pictures were gone, and I felt humiliated. And that moment reinforced every fear I had about being my authentic self. It also made me angry, partially because she lied and said she didn't do it when she obviously did. But God, I hate being lied to. But when parents, like, directly or indirectly deny your reality by saying things like that didn't happen, or not acknowledge or talk about events that actually occurred, people don't realize, but that causes a lack of self-trust. That's a form of trauma, and it creates an inability to trust your own perception, or it creates a situation where we gaslight ourselves. So if you're like 99.9% of trauma survivors, you've struggled with questions of, did that really happen? Was it real? Was it really that bad? Was it my fault? Like, I do that all the time. So, yeah, it was mad as hell. And another reason it made me angry was because of the implications of destroying something that belonged to me. You know what I mean? Like, how rude. And, like, sometimes I get filled with so much rage that I feel like I could blow up at any moment, especially when I think about how bold and audacious and ambitious my younger self was, and how many people over the years tried to kill his spirit, tried to stifle his creativity and otherwise get him to lose confidence in himself. I hate them all, actually. I hate them all. Like, years of rejection and being made to feel like I wasn't good enough made someone who was like super sure of who he was and what he wanted start to doubt every single bright and sparkly thing about himself. And there's nothing I want more than to avenge that part of myself who was taught to feel shame and guilt and embarrassment over things I had little to no control over. You know what I mean? And, like, it's not even about having something to prove anymore. At this point, everything I do, I'm doing out of pure spite. Like, I don't want to heal my inner child. Fuck that. I want revenge. So, fuck healing. Fuck healing. But no, in true honesty, for anyone out there struggling with similar fears and anxieties, I just want to say, like, you deserve to live openly and honestly, no matter what anyone else thinks. But speaking of trauma, like, relationships were not safe for me either. Like, I've been in controlling toxic situations where I lost parts of myself trying to please others. Like, my trauma, like, didn't stop at home. Like, it followed me into my relationships. Like, I found myself caught in this, like, confusing pattern of, like, chasing men who are, like, emotionally unavailable or already in relationships. And, like, somehow I almost always ended up feeling like the other woman. Like, never truly wanted, never enough, like side chick vibes. But on the flip side, like when I'd meet someone who was like kind and sweet and genuinely generous with me, I couldn't let my guard down. Like, I didn't feel like I could fully trust them, or I convinced myself we were incompatible. So I'd end things quickly, but then I'd be left wondering, why was I so hung up on guys who couldn't commit to me, yet I couldn't commit to the ones who actually wanted me? Like, what was that about? Was it because my dad was a married man who cheated on my mom constantly? Was I like unconsciously chasing men like him, trying to recreate the dynamic, searching for the version of him I felt safe with as a child? Or maybe it was my mom's influence too. Like, she was the one who stayed, the one who tolerated his betrayals, and I grew up watching her accept less than she deserved. So, did I learn from her example that love meant sacrificing your self worth for someone else's affection? I don't know. But when we don't grow up in like safe relationships, we develop insecure attachment patterns, and it's no wonder I ended up with such an anxious avoidant attachment style. Like, I grew up walking on eggshells, torn between craving love and bracing myself for the pain of it. Like, did I stand a chance? Like, did I stand a chance? Be for real. Knowing who my parents were, like, did I actually stand a chance? I don't know. Like, I feel like I don't know, people don't really think about the impact that childhood trauma has on our brains. And, like, I think people often underestimate how traumatic the modern dating scene can be when you're a gay person who's looking for a monogamous romantic relationship in a culture where casual, no strings attached hookups run rampant. Like, of course, like everyone else, I enjoy sex, but obviously, obviously, but it's just not as important to me as feeling emotionally connected to someone. Like, so I'll make a dating profile and like every dating app you can think of, and I'll spend weeks or even months getting to know someone, opening up about personal details about my life, telling them all about my hopes and dreams, all my fears and insecurities, even about my friends and family, only for the connection to fade away. Like, only for them to tell me that they're not interested in being anything more than just friends or whatever the fuck. And then you have to like start fresh with someone new. It's annoying. And it's disheartening, but I can't let my hurt feelings affect whoever new I'll be engaging with because that wouldn't be fair to them. So I spend weeks or months getting to know someone, opening up about personal details about my life, telling them about all my exes and situationships, only to be bombarded with red flags or constant reminders of how incompatible the two of us are, and eventually have to start fresh with someone new again, and now I have trust issues, and I find myself more cynical, but I can't come off as cold and aloof, otherwise I would be doing myself a disservice. So I spend weeks or even months getting to know someone else, opening up about personal details about my life. Do you see a pattern? Do you see a pattern? About my mental health struggles, about how depressed I am, only for them to tell me that after careful consideration, they've come to the realization that they're not ready for a relationship after all. Like, go to hell, go to hell, go to hell. Only to discover that they're in a brand new relationship with someone else not too long after. Like, go to the farthest fucking pits of hell, you beast. But the process is so tiring. Like, honestly, I don't think I was crazy before. But if I'm crazy now, it's because the men I've dealt with over the years made me that way. It's like so incredibly draining. And like, I honestly don't even know how many like talking phases I have left in me because I'm traumatized. I'm traumatized. Like, enough with the small talk. Are you gonna be the love of my life or not? Like, I kind of feel like Sisyphus rolling the rock up that hill because even though like the dating scene is absolutely diabolical, I can't help but keep putting myself out there. Like, am I a masochist? Am I mentally ill? Well, yes. Well, yes. Well, yes. And don't even get me started on the men who operate in bad faith. Like the ones who are like manipulative, coercive, or like sometimes even outright abusive. Because I've had my fair share of those too. Like, for example, like there was this time in my life when I was willing to make certain compromises just to like fund my creative projects. So in 2017, I would have been like 20 at the time. I met this man online when I was in New York, and he offered to help me file my trademark for Charlie Cashmere, and he said he paid for it if I hooked up with him. And so I was like, I guess, sure. So when we finally met, he made it clear that he expected things to go a certain way. And me being me, I always practice safe sex, but he insisted that we go without protection. And of course, I refused. But he kept pushing, sulking, giving me the cold shoulder, making it seem like I was the one being difficult. And the energy shifted, the vibe shifted for real. And eventually I felt bad, so I gave in. Plus, I needed my trademark filed. And in that moment, I convinced myself that I had to do what I had to do. So we went raw and then we did our thing. And, when the deed was done, he started laughing. And I was like, what's so funny? And he looked me dead in the eye and was like, you're so dumb. Like, I can't believe you let me go raw because I actually have HIV. And I felt my entire body go cold. Like, my stomach dropped. I just sat there frozen in shock. And when he saw her visibly shaking, I was like, he smirked and said, just kidding. He said he didn't actually have the virus. And I was like, you're a fucking psychopath. You're a psychopath, actually. And whatever shred of trust or faith I had in him completely shattered. Like, I grabbed my things, called an Uber, and I left. I immediately blocked him. And of course, I got tested right after, and thankfully, my results came back negative. But the damage was already done. Like, that experience was so traumatic. Like, it was a reminder of how easily people manipulate, coerce, and play cruel games just because they can. Like, men are not okay. Like, they're crazy, actually. Crazy. And, like, even friendships can become challenging. Like, I've had so many, like, weird experiences as well, like, where I had to, like, struggle with trust and question people's intentions. Like, during my first year of college, for example, like, I met this one guy who was, like, shy and a little reserved, and so I brought him into my friend circle and we became like really close. Like we bonded over music, and I introduced him to platforms like SoundCloud and Audacity, and like I taught him how to produce and record vocals because he wanted to be an artist like me as well. And it felt so good, like sharing something I was passionate about with someone who seemed to genuinely appreciate it. And things took a turn the next semester. Like, one day we were in his dorm room because he boarded on campus, and he had a guy over. And that guy was like very rude to me, specifically. And I called him out, like the guy and also my friend. And I expected my friend to stand up for me, but he stayed silent and like was shrugging it off and was like, don't worry, he's just joking. And it's like, what? It was very weird. And that spoke volumes. So I left and decided to cut him off because if you can't defend me in front of people who disrespect me, what kind of friend are you? You know what I mean? But what I didn't expect was the fallout that followed. Like, not too long after that, he started spreading rumors about me on campus, like accusing me of trying to flirt with his ex boyfriend, which was like so out of pocket and so far from the truth. Like, as if that wasn't enough, he made like a whole diss track about me on SoundCloud. Actually, I think it was two diss tracks. Like, crazy. It got worse when I started getting harassed, like, from multiple spam accounts on my phone, like, filled with threats and nasty accusations. Like, at first I had no idea who was behind them, but as the puzzle pieces came together, it became clear it had to be him. It had to be him. But experiencing it, Like, now I'm fine. Like, I've moved on, I've processed, I've healed. Still traumatized, but I've healed. But at the time, it was heartbreaking because this was someone I considered a friend, and I don't know, it's like our friendship got ruined over some random fuckboy. Like, really, sis? I was sad and angry and honestly hurt. Like, it made me realize how easy it was for people to, like, I don't know, choose other people over you. And I guess it's easy for people to make assumptions about me based on how I present myself online because I'm so open and unapologetic about, being gay. And, some people might think I have loose morals and no boundaries because of, like, my content. But there are just certain lines I would never cross. And the fact that he painted me as someone who would cross those lines, like, that cut deep because I'm very much a girl's girl, like girl code actually means something to me. I would never like hook up with a friend's ex or anyone they're interested in. You know what I mean? Like, what? It's crazy. It's crazy. But I did go into hiding after that. Like, I didn't know who to trust because suddenly it felt like alliances were being formed. Like, some of my so called friends were still talking to him despite knowing everything he did or said about me. And that stung. It kind of felt like a betrayal as well. Honestly, it was very much giving Taylor Swift Reputation era, not gonna lie. So I felt like I had to disappear and rebuild myself from scratch. But that experience changed me for real. Like, made me more guarded, more skeptical of people's intentions. And while I've healed from it, I can't lie. Part of me still like side eyes people a little harder before I letting them in. Um, I've been through shit, bitch. I've been through so much shit. Like, I'm thinking now about like the first job I had. Like, ugh, another eye-opening experience. Like, before I came out, I had this coworker who seemed obsessed with knowing if I was gay or not. Like, every day it was like the same invasive questions, the same uncomfortable conversations. Like, he'd ask me like personal sexual things that were completely inappropriate for work. And no matter how much I tried to like shut it down, like politely at first and then more firmly, like he just wouldn't stop. So it got to the point where I dreaded coming to work and the anxiety would build up before my shift because I knew what was coming and I couldn't take it anymore. So one day I went to my manager in private, hoping she'd handle it discreetly. So I explained the situation and how uncomfortable it made me, and I asked her if she could talk to him privately or at least do something to make it stop. Tell me why this woman decided that the best course of action was to call a full team meeting to air out our grievances right there in front of everybody. She announced that I had made a sexual harassment complaint against my coworker. My stomach dropped. Like, he was furious. Like, he turned to me mad as hell and screamed, saying he hated me. He was like, Tika, I hate you. And I was like, oh my god, like, ugh. One, it's to yell at me. One is to tell me how much you hate me. Oh my god. Worst fear is confirmed. The worst part though is that the same coworkers who had been there, who had heard the things he said to me daily, who knew I wasn't lying, went silent. Like, some even made it seem like I was the one causing problems, and I was humiliated. I sat at my cubicle and cried, like, not gonna lie. The betrayal, the embarrassment, the complete lack of support. Like, I felt so lonely, so alone. Like, it was an isolating experience for sure. And that experience stuck with me. It taught me how easily people throw you under the bus to avoid conflict. How even those who witness injustice firsthand will stay quiet when it matters most. But it also taught me to trust my instincts. Like, if a space makes you feel unsafe and unheard, leave. Leave. You don't owe your peace to anyone. Funny enough, though, like years later, like the one time I was in a toxic work environment was when I actually left the customer service industry and started to work at a PR and marketing firm. So I had an amazing time, not gonna lie. And I look back at my memories there with fondness. But one of my coworkers like tagged me in a post. We went for drinks after work one night, and I guess my boss saw And she looked at my Instagram page and had a meeting with me and HR because she thought my content was a potential liability for the company since my content was too provocative for the brand, meaning too gay. Which in corporate Jamaica, which is quite conservative, was a no no. You can't be like so big and bold with it, you know what I mean? So she decided not to renew my contract. So of course that brought up a lot of old wounds, like, feeling rejected and abandoned. And to be honest, that was kind of a trauma. I think about it all the time. Um, to cope with all of these like traumatic events over the years, of course, like I'd experiment with like alcohol and recreational drugs and searching for an escape from or maybe even answers to all of my problems. But there's one experience in particular with shrooms that forced me to confront that chaos inside of me. It was like terrifying and liberating all at once. Showed me certain truths that I wasn't ready to face but needed to. And that experience taught me that healing isn't just about escaping the pain, it's about sitting with it, understanding it, and slowly finding a way through. Last but not least, I want to talk about generational trauma because sometimes you're just not healing from your own wounds. You're dealing with the emotional baggage of ancestors who had no access to therapy and just kept it pushing. Ever been guilt tripped by a relative for no reason? Or told to pray it away instead of actually addressing your emotions? Because I have. Yeah, cultural stigma around mental health is real. But the good news is, we're breaking cycles. Talking about this stuff, that's actually revolutionary. And let's not forget the power of storytelling. Whether it's therapy, art, or even this podcast, putting words to pain can help take away its power. So if you're struggling, remember, your story doesn't end at the worst chapter. Looking back, all of these experiences, no matter how painful, have shaped me in ways I didn't understand at the time. They've made me more empathetic, more resilient, and honestly, more human. They've also given me thick skin and a twisted sense of humor, not gonna lie. But let me be clear, trauma doesn't define you. Your trauma doesn't define you. You're more than what happened to you. And healing isn't about erasing the past. It's about learning to exist beyond it, on your own terms. And if you struggle with that like I do sometimes, just know that your pain is valid. But so is your capacity to heal. Take your time. Be patient with yourself. And know that you're not alone. I've learned that healing isn't linear. I still have bad days, but I've also found strength in sharing my story. So, thank you for allowing me to be vulnerable today and trauma dump. Thank you for listening to this deeply personal episode. If anything I've shared resonates with you, I hope it reminds you that there's light, even in the darkest places. So, until next time, take care of yourselves and each other. Bye.